Good afternoon, everyone. Wow, that's really loud. Thank you all for coming to this roundtable discussion with 5 of the artists participating in Seance. We're very glad to be here. Thank you to everyone at SEMA for making this possible and for organising translation. It's really nice to have an opportunity to speak with the artists after the process of installing the show. And we wanted to use this opportunity really to give each of them an opportunity to speak in their own words about their work, to introduce it to the audience, and then perhaps just to reflect a little bit on how these works engage with some of the overarching themes of the exhibition, but also the different ways in which they cross over with other works in the show. Some of them may be predictable, some of them may be unexpected. So the way we thought we'd organise this is just, first of all, to go through each of the 5 artists I have on my left individually. They'll talk about their work, and then I'll ask a few questions. Once we've done that, then we'll open it up for a group discussion on stage and perhaps pick up on some of those themes or crossovers. And once that's done, we'll open up to the audience. I anticipate that we'll probably speak for around 50 minutes on stage and then open up for questions. So I think, I should introduce myself. I always forget to do that. I'm Ben Eastham. I'm the English editor of the publications, or the editor of the English publications, I should say, or the English editor of the English publications also. So I've been working on the printed materials, and we'll be here to work on the catalogue and helping with the wall text and that guidebook that I hope you've all been using as you walk around and see the show. So not involved directly with the curation, but at one remove, let's say, which perhaps makes me a good mediator for this conversation, or a medium maybe to stick with the theme. I'm going to stop making really bad jokes at this point. So I think we'll just get started with Haroon. I should introduce everyone first. Haroon Mirza on my left, Hiwa K, Aki Onda, Hyungmin Yoon, and Sana Almajeedi. So Haroon, we'll start with you if we can. Your work on the second floor, 2 paintings, do you think of them as paintings or mixed media installations, called Solar Cell Compositions, 2 in a series. So maybe you could just begin by introducing the works and maybe explaining a little bit how they fit into your wider practice.
Yeah, so a pleasure to be here and back in Seoul. I'm really fond of this city and South Korea in general. I've got a shared thing with Aki, Paeknam June is a suddenly in the light. So yeah, Paeknam June is a massive influence on my work, as is on Aki as well. It's always good to be here. So the works here. They're not entirely representative of my work in general, my practice generally, but they're a very sort of condensed form of my work without a sound element, which is normal in my work. And I guess they are paintings because they have miniature paintings included in them, which are commissioned works. So first and foremost, those works are storyboards for an opera, which manifests as either on stage or film installations, mixed media film installations. And so they're scenes from this operatic cosmology. And what I've done is commissioned an artist in Lahore, a miniature painter who graduated from the NCA, the National College of Arts, Prishna Amina Khan, her name is. And I would describe scenes to her from this opera, and she would paint them in miniature. And there's a tradition with miniature painting, as some of you may know, as you would know, the illumination, which is framing the painting, usually with gilded in gold or really intricate pattern making. So what I've essentially done is illuminated those paintings, but with solar cells and light. So it's like a dual form of illumination. So there's the illumination of the framing and also because the solar cells generate electricity. There's an illumination with the LED. How long do you want me to talk for, by the way? Because
I think you can keep going, and then I'll come to you with some questions.
Yeah, and so so the solar cells are kind of placed in a form where it was kind of most efficient to have that many solar cells on this sort of format, and that efficiency kind of created this form, this pattern, which is sort of very similar to sacred geometries, especially the Hizab, the eight-pointed star that you see in contemporary days in Islamic sort of iconography. But it has a long history in Egypt as the Ogdode or other sort of cultural sacred references. So there's an interest between theology and neurochemistry in a way. So the paintings are depicting sort of women that have spiritual practices. One is a shaman from the Amazonian basin who is part of an ayahuasca cult, who was actually murdered a few years ago, this particular person that it's depicting. And the other one is just a person in a cave. And both ayahuasca and sensory deprivation in a cave induces hallucinations. So my interest was in hallucinations and a biochemical contender for that hallucination that could be DMT, which is the active ingredient in ayahuasca. And DMT is also a neurotransmitter that causes hallucinations. And then you have the light, which is a halo, which is obviously coming from Christian iconography. The halos specifically referencing Tintoretto paintings and how Tintoretto would make these halos of points of light like this, little stars. And so it's bringing all these like different theological and neurochemical and sort of religious narratives together in one sort of frame.
Yeah, I guess one of the really interesting things about the way you describe the work actually is that there are depictions of spiritual experience in the miniature at the centre of them. But this spiritual experience in two senses, I suppose, is provoked or related to material physical processes. So first, as you were saying, in the production of DMT, either through sensory deprivation or through ayahuasca. And then also in the literal sense of their halos being produced by the physical processes of energy generation, and that is made part of the work that you're seeing. So there's a very interesting thing there to me that there's a reconciliation of spiritual experience with these physical processes, with things that are explicable, and yet it's not reductive in that sense. And I think that's something interesting to consider, or maybe something you could expand upon. It's not the reduction of spiritual experience to physical processes. It's actually a kind of combination of them, and that seems to be something that is quite consistent in your work, this idea that providing a neurochemical explanation for something doesn't devalue or undermine the value of the spiritual experience. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that, because it feels so pertinent to some of the themes of the show.
Yeah, it actually reminds me of something Aki said yesterday about this experience with Paek Nam-jun, right? And then we had a conversation afterwards, and perhaps you can talk about it in a minute, that when you have an experience, whether it's a mystical, spiritual experience, when one has one, or whether it's a psychedelic experience induced by a chemical such as DMT or psilocybin or LSD or whatever, or you have a dream, or you have just some kind of experience. And that experience is a real experience to you. So whether, and the belief of that experience is a very separate thing, right? So whether I believe in something spiritual or other is irrelevant to whether I believe if Aki's experience was real or not. It was a real experience for Aki, right? So that's the thing that defines those types of experiences, and belief is a very separate thing, because I guess another undertone is this thing between truth and belief that I'm always trying to reconcile and kind of explore. What is the where do beliefs come from, and how does truth play a role of that, or the lack thereof? Right. So yeah, it doesn't really. So you're right. It doesn't really. Or how can I say? I'm not taking any sort of position in terms of where I stand in these things. It's more like an exploration to open it up and kind of discuss it, because then it allows for other discussions to take place, which are kind of more open and critical in terms of what happens in the world.
I'm sure this relationship between truth and belief and reality and unreality and who gets to decide and whether these things can be universal or not, or contextual entirely, is something we'll be returning to. And maybe this is a nice point to move on to Hiwa, actually, whose new work in the show does, I think, address some of these issues around belief, around truth, also around perspective and the gaze. So maybe, again, just to begin, you could tell the audience a little bit about how the work came to be and how it was made and some of the things you were exploring in it.
Thank you. After 2019, somehow, I found myself very helpless in what I'm doing as an artist, and our impact on the world, and that started more or less from 2016, actually, slowly with Trump's first term, and so I decided to slow down my career and just got this farm on the mountains, and then started to heal, as I say in the film, also myself and also the soil at the same time after the 2003 war, after Monsanto and all those things which happened in the country. So it's more about that. So I've coming from a family with a Marxistic background, and most of my family they've been communists since the 50s. So we never had this spiritual background, but you somehow this helplessness, you slip into it somehow. Like Sandra says, we tried every possible, and now we tried the impossible. So that's the last try you do. Is also in my previous film, which I didn't finish. My name is Hiwa, and so the doctor asked me, "What's your name?" Hiwa means hope. I said, "My name is highly unlikely, but not impossible." So it's about that thread which we are holding to, and. So basically it comes from that, and the danger also slowly you start to feel good and to work with the community there, with all kind of activists, and slowly find out that the drones are very dangerous, like there were lots of Turkish drones around, which I don't mention in the film also for some security reason and poetic also. I call them the false stars, and I was also with somebody in my farm who was hiding from the Turkish government. So she never wanted to turn off her phone, and they were and I heard lots of people were killed by that. So it was a lot also about this intense moment, intensity of everything, also then you start questioning time, you start questioning what if I've been struck already by the drones, maybe this is the thing. Also looking at the stars, and you don't know which one's star, and suddenly you like one of them, and it's a drone actually. It's so you don't know which one is coming to slow you down or to accelerate you to pre-birth. So it's mostly this, and also talking about the whole, this neoliberalism after Americanizing the country and all the industry of medicals, and so and then I found that healer where Anton encouraged me to start something with. It was not in my mind to do anything about it. He was just healing me by looking at me, and he describes how many stones I have and exactly he positioned them, and he just destroys them, shatter them with his eye. He's looking, and slowly I was interested more into that work.
I mean, that's one of the really fascinating things about the work. And just to give a little bit of context, so it begins with Hiwa's visit to a healer who is able to detect his kidney stones and to dissolve them, I guess, effectively.
Sorry?
To dissolve the stones.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, to remove it. Yeah.
And then you go on to reflect, and you talk about there being two types of gaze. So one type of gaze which slows down and which is healing, and another type of gaze which is accelerating and actually takes away time. The first type of gaze being associated, I guess, with the healer, and the second type of gaze being associated then with these drones that you talk about.
Yeah.
And this idea of these twin types of gaze is so interesting, and it brought to my mind, as an artist, as someone who is filming things, who is using a camera, how do you make sure that your type of gaze is the first type of gaze? What does that mean? To shoot someone, to see them in their practice, and to make sure that your gaze is one that slows, one that heals, one that helps.
Yeah, because very good question. Because at the first, before you click, you are engaged already, and you don't have this kind of signified and signifier. So that's what I talk and mention in the film. Also, we go back to the beloved, and the beloved it has an old tradition in Sufi literature. Beloved is always you talk about your lover, but actually you talk about the one. So what Rumi is talking about, Hafiz is talking about, Hallaj, all the old literature. So it's about when it slows you down, it brings you back to the to the pre-Big Bang also somehow. Yeah, I don't want to play with big words, but
Well, no, it's very beautiful. I think there's a lot more here to talk about, but maybe we should move on. And maybe the Big Bang is a nice point to move to Arki, and the idea of there being, I guess. I mean, the Big Bang itself is a beautiful metaphor for the work in that it describes the echoes of the universe that we can still hear now, and the sense of in the air there is the sound of things that have happened in the past that are otherwise invisible. And I guess this sense of the whole of the cosmos being an archive through which we can hear sounds and channel. And maybe this is a nice point for you just to describe Arki. Namjoon Paik was speaking to me and how it came to be.
For this Biennale, I'm presenting my installation titled Namjoon's Spirit Was Speaking to Me at Nakhon Sangha. So let me briefly explain how this work came about. In 2010, while I was staying in Seoul, unexpectedly, I had a spiritual encounter with Namjoon Paik. And I was, one evening, I was listening to a radio, and that radio channel shifted to kind of cryptic messages. And I used this kind of radio, which has a tape recorder. So I recorded the message. And at that time, I didn't fully understand what it means, why Namjoon Paik was speaking to me, and why this kind of radio served as a medium to, catch his message. So I started one thing. I'm a practitioner as an artist. So I started conducting seances in different cities on different continents to channel his spirit. At the same time, I was skeptical too, to be honest. Why? So I started about researching, especially about Paik's relationship with shamanism, and also a mystic form of radio as a medium. And what I discovered was really fascinating. So that kind of convinced me this kind of spiritual communication was not only possible, but deeply meaningful. So I get a bit more details. And Paik was using forms of shamanism, both form and also the symbolism of shamanism as well. All through his career, and that surfaced in many of his work, which he staged as a performance at times or installations. And Paik himself was a quite master shaman, and he once said, basically, in Korea, diverse form of shamanism was still, practiced. And he considered himself, he made work unconsciously. However, under influence of the modern, it's kind of female shaman practice. At the same time, okay, this is, Pike is doing a performance, kind of shamanic performance. Also, radio is really interesting medium. So this is actually, this one is Coherer, which is invented by a British scientist called Oliver Lodge. It's actually end of 19th century. And Oliver Lodge was a kind of occultist as well. He wasn't invented this Coherer prototype radio for radio transmission. He wanted to prove telepathy was real. So he basically created the first radio wave. And another inventor, Guglielmo Marconi. I actually met John Hoffman. He was a long-time assistant of Namjoon Pike for decades. And he told me Pike was really into radio transmission. And especially this Marconi. He also, at the end of the 19th century, he first sent a radio signal jumping Bristol Canal. Then 1901, this Marconi claimed, he's received transatlantic radio transmission. 1984, Pike did the first radio, TV, broadcast project, Good Morning, Mr. Orwell. And then after that, by Kipling. So Good Morning, Mr. Orwell connected studios in New York, Paris, and Berlin by using a TV cable, another transmission medium. So actually, John Hoffman, who was assistant, Pike was actually referencing Marconi's transatlantic radio transmission. And also, he said Pike loved radio, and he was actually setting up so many radios in his studio, and at times playing them at once so loud. So somehow, I kind of started finding this kind of facts one by one through the process. And also, there's especially during 20th century, there was lots of secret broadcasts all over the world. Those are kind of, radio transmission from anonymous radio stations. Some of them may be military use or espionage, or but many of them remained unknown. So you never know what they were. Those transmissions, many moved to online digital channels these days. So that kind of radio transmission are getting less and less, but still exist in this world. So there's some kind of mystery. But there's lots of hidden connections, this work. So if you go to see my installation, Nagwamaga, it's basically research, a result of those researches. And I hope you enjoy it. But because I truly believe any of us has that sort of extra sensory perception or capacity to deal with something invisible or unknown or unseen. So that's also my belief.
Yeah, I think this the potential of radio to connect us to other worlds in the most literal sense is something we're going to come back to, I think, shortly with Sana. I also just wanted to, before we move on, ask you a quick question about your performance, Spirits Known and Unknown, which involves the ringing of bells, found bells. And I wondered if you think of that as also a form of channeling or communication with the dead, because you're ringing these bells that have histories that have been read by people before, whether that also functions as a kind of transmission or connection.
Yes, exactly. So I use different medium. Sometimes radio, sometimes handbells. I have 1,000, nearly 1,000 bells, and use them for select them and use them for performance. And also, bells used to be, in ancient time, bells was considered as a instrument to carry message from gods, stay away from evil, many different meanings. But if you hear bells, or and also I use found bells, which was used in different individuals, also in different societies. So it's like bringing back to the sound they rang in the past. So there's a sort of a transmission, warping time. So I try to assess the channel to many different sources at once.
Thank you so much. I think there's a very natural move here to Sana, who is the curator of the sound room at Nakwon Arcade, which I think really does a lot to investigate both these kind of historical relationships between channeling and communication with other worlds and other spirits, and also to remind us of the potential of new acoustic technologies to do that. So maybe, Sana, you could just tell us a little bit about the sound room and your research.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me to be part of this. I curated the sound room at Nakwon Sangha, which is essentially like a listening room. So we invite visitors to listen to the works rather than look. It's a total of 16 artists and collectives. I'm going to read their names. Aram Lee, Aki Onda, Enea Lockwood, and Ruth Anderson. Antonina Nawalka, Breyer Pioridge, Carl Michael von Hauswolf, Jerry Hunt, Josie de Oliveira, Young Hee Choi, Lamont Young, Laurie Spiegel, Lee Chin Sung, Matana Roberts, Meredith Young Soares, Walter Smetak, and Yara Mekawi. These artists are united in their use of sound as a medium for spirituality. So whether they use it for personal means to connect with a beloved one who passed away, or to hold cross-cultural conversations. My research stemmed from basically I was not very familiar with seances before I was invited to be part of this project. So it was a natural move for me to read about the history of musical seances, which, to what I gathered, since you couldn't see ghosts or touch them, or spirits, I mean, they communicated to you through sounds, and because this is before, during Victorian times, before the invention of radio, there was a direct connection between a physical presence and playing music. So they would hold these musical seances, which were essentially concerts, where the piano would make sounds without a person visible, and where trumpets were floating and creating sounds. And then eventually, with the invention of the radio, this mystery was no longer intriguing to the masses. But instead, artists and other researchers started to use technology to speak with spirits. And that's where there was this invention eventually of in the 1950s of something called EVP, electronic voice phenomena. Konstantin Radiv was this Latvian researcher who is partly responsible for coining EVP. So it's a method of speaking with spirits using a tape recorder and radio. He recorded over 100,000 EVP recordings, and you can find a lot of them on YouTube. And EVP is still commonly used by artists and also ghost hunters.
Thank you so much. I mean, one of the things that I think both the sound room and Arki's work does, and it's so nice that they're both in the same complex, is just, I think, remind us of how deeply strange radio and recorded sound is as a phenomenon. Like, it's this very weird thing, and it's easy to forget how deeply strange that must have been when it emerged at the end of the 19th century. And I think we talk a lot in the art world about kind of the invention of photography and mechanical reproduction as having changed completely the way that we understand images and representation. But we tend to talk less about how radio and record players completely changed our relationship to time, in much the same way, I suppose, that photography did. And it's really exciting to go and be reminded that this is, because I think it's easy when we talk about other worlds and connection to treat it either as an analogy or as a kind of metaphor or as, and actually this is a reminder that this is a, you know, the sound room, you are accessing other worlds, invisible worlds, or the past, or the dead. You know, these are the voices of the dead. And I think it's so compelling to have that reminder that these are not, metaphors. This is a very practical way, and it's something that we've become used to and have kind of normalized the strangeness of that. I just wanted to ask one more quick question, because it's something you wrote about in your introductory text for the catalogue, which is great. The catalogue will be out next month, everyone. Very reasonably priced. You talk about Pauline Oliveros and deep listening and absence, and I wonder if you could just expand very, very briefly on the importance of deep listening for the sound room and for your thinking.
So deep listening, essentially I quoted her, I think the quote is like, listen, wait, hold on, I actually have it. Listen to everything all the time and remind yourself when you're not listening. So this is a very famous quote by Pauline. Yeah, it kind of ties in nicely with this idea of like, what do we choose? People don't think about like that listening is a very intentional thing. What do we choose to hear and what do we choose to disregard? And through doing this like deep listening practice, you can attune yourself to listen to things beyond the normal range of your capacity. And yeah, I think it's like a simple idea, but something that is a very meditative thing that would take like years of practice, basically.
Thank you so much. I think this idea of absence or listening to what's not there, or maybe attending to what's not there, is a nice transition to Kyung-Min Yoon's work, particularly Magic Hands. So maybe you just like to expand a little bit on the two works included in the exhibition.
Yeah, thanks. I have two works here. I always am interested in the what's actually like latent in history or in images or in publications, particularly. The two works actually have some things in common, though they are maybe just a few years apart. Magic Hands came first. You see a lot of hand gestures from a distance first. They are like sort of like empty hands, and you do not see the objects on there. They are enlarged, actually, images from a very small antiquarian book I found in an old shop in Vienna. It sort of came like a chance thing. And then it had those images printed by, woodcut print by Albrecht Dürer, who was a very cherished artist there, historical artist. And then those images are small, but still like, because there are no texts, the hand gestures are quite exaggerated in those prints. Often in the old paintings, in the biblical paintings also, the hand gestures works as a language. So in all those pictures, I enlarged the hand gestures only and removed what they are holding, what they're holding on to, and collected them. And then they look kind of like a magic hand gestures that magicians do. So I also got a magic trick manual book and then picked one titled Magic, and then but also I got rid of nouns and any objects in the text because then to treat as same as the images. Quite arbitrarily, I connect them together, just putting side by side. So the text is something from the manual, but and you could read it, though you may not understand it, and certainly you can't do magic, which I find like a magic trick is quite. You know, the manual for magic doesn't sound very magical, so I thought by getting rid of the objects and actually the secrets, it goes back to magic. And the second work is called The Black Book because it is about black humor. And it is an installation using 35mm projector, slide projector, which is causing some problems sometimes downstairs. I think it's because it's also an old machine. I'm actually quite interested in the history of technologies in many areas, but also like the printing technologies and then printing in films, in books. And I have some works made in or about books because I found it very fascinating. And this also is something to do with the development of technological, now it seems very old technique like printing or you know, like a woodcut printing, but at one point it was the most advanced technique. So in that way, and then all those things are sort of used or like very much advanced to spread ideologies, like ruling ideology of that time. And this work is also something to do with that. And the source of this material is something called 삼강 행실도 in Korean, which means illustrated story of three bonds, which is loyal to your king, loyal to your parents, and loyal to your husband. And there are three parts, and it's originated from China, but it's adopted at some point in 15th century in Joseon Dynasty in Korean Peninsula to enhance the ruling ideology at the time, which is Confucianism. Anyway, this book is sort of like something that we hear if you get educated in Korea at some point, but sort of like nobody's really looking at it. And then I got to see the original one of them, because they have printed, it's the most printed publication in that dynasty by the nation. And then they kept printing it and making different versions. They made it, the first one was the one I saw at the National Library here, which the images come from. It has like Chinese text next to it. So basically there's an episode about filial piety and then a text about it. And then in the next page, a different story and a different text. And then over time, a few years later, a Korean alphabet's invented, and then they added a Korean text because they wanted the general public to read it. And then what I found is that there's a huge violence in there because every single story has somebody's getting hurt, arms removed, skins peeled off by somebody or voluntarily. Which sounds really horrible, but it is something like, you know, like you will be loyal to your king even if your arms has to be cut and legs. Anyway, why am I talking about? But I can't pick a less violent example. Anyway, but then the images are woodcut print, and it's very simply cut because of the material and the tools they used. And it's like, maybe it was horrifying to see then, but it's really comical to look at it now. And it is sort of like a real precedent of comic in Asian history. A huge part came from manga in China, in Japan, but also this has some 3 parts and name tags. Anyway, I shouldn't go into detail. And then, so if you look at it, they try to describe it, but I'm not quite sure what's going on, even to compare. So I'm very interested in the relationship between the text and image and how easily it falls, loses the connection, and like the other magic hands, I can just put the text next to it and claim that they are connected, and you might find it.
Do you
or
work
not.
as a translator as well? Have I invented that?
I do. It's my second job.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, I guess, in that way, because part of what you're doing in both of these works is making things less legible, removing things. The kind of captions, if you call them that, the text that accompanies magic hands is slightly abstracted so that it becomes impossible to use. And I just wondered, I mean, I think it's something that also applies to the work of other people on stage, but what's the relationship of your work to translation? Do you think of that those two jobs as related to each other or opposed to each other, or even?
I think it's both, actually, right? Because probably since I moved to Canada about a decade ago, translation became like an everyday burden. I mean, I moved to somewhere else and spoke in English, which is my second language. But then when I went to Canada, and it really came as sort of a chore, something that I have to switch quickly sometimes, and I do a lot now, and I'm getting more and more used to it. The etymology of translation or translate is actually from Latin, and it's like you move something along to another place. And you're definitely when I read it,
in Greek it's metaphor, and I know this because I used to live in Athens, and I was there during COVID, and every so often this van would turn up outside my house that said metaphor on the side, and I could never work out what it was. It was the weirdest thing. It was like this metaphorical van kept turning up outside my house. And then I found out later, much later, that metaphor means to carry across. It's exactly the same system. And actually it was just a moving van. But it was picking up like furniture from my next door, and I was like, what? Like, what are these messages that it's carrying across? Like,
very mystical.
Yeah, it was amazing. But that's really this idea of carrying across, I think, given that we're talking about moving between worlds or realities, is really interesting.
Yeah, I think that that really made me think like art practice as a translation. I mean, there's a lot of academic and artistic writings and practice around translation as well. And I did some projects, literally with the ones I did like a workshop with children and aged between like 6 to 11, because like in, I don't know, they say after that you can't get rid of the accents, but until then you sound like fluent local. And then I was just seeing like how quickly they move on, like I live in Vancouver, and it's a place of immigrants, and then a lot of immigrants coming in. And then what with the kids, like that, it takes like it could be a month for them to become or change the first language. It was really fascinating. And then I sort of wanted to cherish that part, so I was doing some workshops about like creating their own language, which all the kids do. And it's, I don't know, somehow it's something to do with this too, that I picked some like hand gestures as language, which would have been at that time as some sort of a gesture by saints. But then when I isolate it, it's not anymore. But then it could be translated by you.
Yeah, I think one of the other things that is really interesting in what you're saying is this, again, another reminder of how technologies expand worlds. I mean, talking about printing, particularly in the invention of the printing press. And sometimes it's easy to imagine that we live in a world in which new technologies have ever arrived and transformed the way that we understand the world or relate to other people. But these shifts do happen, and they're dramatic, and they've happened before. And I wonder, I now like to see if anyone has questions for each other, but maybe just on that point, actually, like, it strikes me that we talk about kind of the advent of new technologies and the possibilities they create, and what we were talking about earlier, this kind of reconciliation of technology with spiritual experience. And I think that begs the question, which has maybe been something that shadows this biennial more broadly, is whether these technologies, whether we can be optimistic about this, about the capacity of new technologies to reconnect us to the world rather than allow us to accelerate its destruction, as he was put. And whether you're optimistic or we can be optimistic.
I think the optimism probably comes out of probably a kind of more diverse understanding of what technology is, in the sense that we you know, and this is where it becomes spiritual, I think, for me. This idea of techno-shamanism, again, is that technology, we've somehow defined it as something man-made, that it's this thing that we've developed, and it's new, and it's separate from nature. And Heidegger's interesting in this sense. He talks about technology as a species that co-evolves with humans. It's not something that we create, but it's sort of evolved alongside humans. It's an interesting way of looking at it, I think, especially when you think about AI, machine learning. And the thing that I find that I struggle with AI is that it's not that intelligent, actually, right? It's artificial. It's not even artificial, you know. It's kind of, so there's this question of what is artificial, you know. If a bowerbird or a beaver makes a dam, is that artificial or is that natural? You know, in the same way, if we make toothpaste, is that artificial or is it natural? If I make a pancake with some natural ingredients, where's the line of what's artificial and what's natural? So for me, everything is kind of nature. It's a part of nature, no matter how technologically advanced it is. For me, that's where the optimism comes out of. Is the being optimistic about the fact that it's all one thing. That technology is a natural phenomenon. Like my medium, in many ways, is electricity, which is totally natural. You know, I also make techno music, and the term techno is, you know, it's music made with electrical signals, which is a natural phenomenon. So it's kind of, I think it's recontextualizing how we think about these things. That is where the optimism comes from, and how we engage with artifacts in our sphere of being, and what they mean to us. It's interesting that this thing of the radio being understood as a form of telepathy, and you sort of touched on it before after Aki spoke. There was this. It must have been a huge revolution to be able to hear somebody's voice, what somebody's thinking, when you're not in their presence. That's a massive revelation, and it was a sonic form, rather than a visual one at that stage. But again, the electromagnetic spectrum is part of our physical world. It's completely natural phenomenon that's all around us, all the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it actually, if anyone wants to break in, by the way, please do.
I'd like to add is we cannot talk about technology as such. We know that it's great always we have, but the problem is like wealth, distribution of wealth. Where wealth lands, and in which hands will land this technology? We have to talk about that, and that's why we don't say technology as such if it's dangerous or not. No, in whose hand it is. That's the danger, and if we don't secure that, it will be always, dangerous. I mean, it's very naive what I say, but true.
No, but I think that's also developed really beautifully in the work as well. And I think not just the film that is here, but in a lot of your work, you talk about perspective, and I guess that's a little bit to do with who has control of the thing. And you talk about the view from above, the view from below, and in this work, even you have someone looking up at the stars, and that perspective of being on the ground. and looking upwards and being close to someone and being intimate with someone, as against, I think you call it the sniper's gaze of being above. And I think it's really interesting how art can, be a way of reframing what it means to have access or to be the person in control of those perspectives. And your work seems so much to be around fusing, let's say, technology, but anything with intimacy, with closeness. And I wonder if maybe you could talk about that, even just that sense of the perspective, looking from above, looking down, these different gazes, intimacy.
Yeah, thank you that you brought this subject. It's important. Most of my other works, also like the mirror, which I balance on my nose, and it's always about that gaze, which you must distinct yourself from the reality, like the judge who is judging about who comes from which part of Iraq, and you cannot prove that you come from there unless you have to look through his eyes, which is bureaucratic eyes, and the same thing also, like since thousands of years, thousands not talking about, but yeah, since long time, like West has this vertical gaze, and so most of my works is this attempt, through this mirror, to hijack this eye, and to see a little bit from above your scattered parts, where you could land, and you don't have all the overview because it has been scattered for a long time. Yeah, basically most of the works are about that, and that's why I'm quite interested in this subject of healing here, because for decades we see exhibitions, and sometimes you have the feeling that you are, after the showings, I'm not criticizing them, but when you come out of the exhibition, you think that you've been watching BBC News, It's just like you come with such a heavy feeling, and without transforming it into something, something, we can always talk about the negative, but how could we go beyond that, like sometimes I call it as if, so the forgiveness comes from there, maybe the healing comes from there. Sorry, I took too much space.
Yeah, it's interesting. I just wanted to touch upon what Ben said earlier, but the question you asked me really. But would you say you're more optimistic about going back to technology, more optimistic about technology and technology's potential than people and what people can do in positions of power, perhaps?
Your question is like people, people who have technology or who have no technology.
Yeah, well,
which one?
it does. It's more like because technology, people with power have the means to control technology and how it's used, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
So, are you, in terms of optimism, would you be more optimistic about what potential technology can have, in the sense that social media can galvanize people or more than say that certain people have, like people in positions of power, like fascist regimes and politicians.
But it's also, it doesn't mean that if you democratize the technology, you will end up with something good. Like for example, with Sana, we know after 2003, they opened up a free election in Iraq, and we ended up with a very religious, backwarded. I mean, I'm not against religion, but a very backwarded government, and we are still, suffering from that. So it's not always like this. Like if you open up with this democratic, like Facebook is being used. Actually, it was people could use it for, like an Arab Spring, for example, in Tunisia. Facebook played a big role, in other countries, But you see, slowly people are using it for other things, like they're brainwashed, they're like every other technology. So it's not about that. My problem is about if you see it like about power itself, like how can we prevent, power from falling into some other hands, and it has been for hundreds of years, this question, since.
But this, I think, is a really interesting question. I guess this is again about when you're talking about the mirror work and having multiple perspectives. And actually, I think when power, even social media maybe is a good example here, when it's genuinely pluralist and it's genuinely open, then it can be empowering, but inevitably that power becomes channeled into smaller and smaller groups of people who then channel it and use it in certain ways. And maybe an analogy here is with Aki's work. and this, and even what Sana is doing, I think, and the idea that you can move through frequencies, that you can experience different sounds, different channels, let's say, and that actually moving in that way is very important, that you're not just stuck to one way of thinking or one way of seeing. And that may be a nice analogy between ways of seeing and ways of hearing.
Yes, beautiful. In a minor range it works, but when we are living in a society where 95% of people are hallucinating, we are in a hallucinating society, you know. Definitely, we are hallucinating reality.
How do you mean we're hallucinating?
Yeah, like we are hallucinating what we are, you know, like people are hallucinating, you know, our perspective about gender, our perspective about, you know, like as all the aspects of life, you know, we are not, that's why I bring back this question of healing now. What is healing? Where we can start from, you know.
So we are hallucinating or we are hallucinated?
No, I say we are in a society like people are mostly, you know, they are manipulated by, you know, by images, by everything, you know. Like
We are hallucinated by the media.
no, like people are, yeah, maybe
Or
we are also part of it.
Most
maybe.
ways. Most ways.
Yeah, and that yeah, I'm
Is it
talking
like,
about,
yeah,
we are hallucinating reality, you know.
is the delusion, is that hallucination coming from social media? I have to say that I've never used social media, so
Yeah.
I don't even use WhatsApp, right, which is a problem sometimes in this day and age, especially when traveling. Coming from that position, I'm kind of agnostic in terms of what technology can do, right? And we've seen that it does both. But like what you're talking about now is something very critical, because what you're saying is that these technologies are actually manipulating people to think and behave in a very particular way, which is damaging, and that we need healing from, basically.
That sounds like conspiracy theory. I wouldn't go in that direction.
I've just noticed we've run way over time, sorry. I'm really interested in this idea of dream, actually. Like, I think we all live in a dream. I mean, I think this is kind of a neurological truth, right? It's like actually most of our reality is constructed. It's 99% constructed, and actually a very small part of it, when our eyes pick up information, we've already constructed the world and we just adjust it very smallly. We all live in a reality which is constructed by our mind. We're all hallucinating, we're all dreaming all the time. I don't know where I'm going to go with that. But I thought before, because we're running out of time, whether we just might open it up to the audience and any questions.
I just would like to say it's been a fascinating opportunity to listen to all of your thoughts and your investigations and research. For those of you who know me, we come from a spiritualist background, and it's quite exciting that people in the art world are investigating what spiritualists have been working with for over 150 years. But I was very fascinated with Haroon's conception of everything falls in a natural way. And one of the things that comes through in the philosophy that we follow, or, you know, look into, is about the laws of the universe, and that nothing can happen in our world unless it falls within the natural world law. And I guess one of the easiest things to think about that is the law of cause and effect. The conception of the healing, the question came up as where does it come from? And I'd like to ask perhaps, Haroon, where you think it comes from.
The healing, or the need for healing?
The healing,
Yeah.
where would any of you think that comes from? I know it came through the gentleman that you saw, the shaman that you saw, but where do you have a thought on where it came from to come through
Haji
him?
Laser. It comes from Haji Laser.
Comes from...
Yeah. I think healing comes from going back to the heart. I think it's very naive, again, I say it. But experiencing that after a collapse I experienced also ideologically, and also like I lost lots of hope. Even my name was Hope, still. But I think, yeah, we need to go somewhere else. You know, like Muhammad has a very nice saying. Says when you want to resist to make a change, start with your hand. And when you don't have the opportunity, go to your tongue. Move your tongue. You know, say a word. And when you don't have opportunity, the least you can do is go to the heart.
We also have a very the thing about being open to healing. You know, there's so many different avenues for healing and finding a way to be healed, and that could be through modern medicine, that could be through Chinese medicine, it could be through spiritual engagement. But I think it's also to do with, you know, wanting to be healed, you know, knowing that there's something that that needs to be healed, and going. And then looking for that and finding it and going through that process. And even in you know, medicine, there's 20% placebo effect, you know, which there's placebo and there's a nocebo, which is the opposite. So that shows, for me, certainly, that there's 20% is we do it ourselves, you know, and it's to do with our bodies and our psychology and so. I think the key thing probably in that is the belief in that system that you're going towards to find that healing and having, you know, and going it with your heart and eyes open and fully going there.
Yeah, I think I just wanted to add as well, one of the metaphors, let's say, that's been part of the conversation amongst the artistic directors I know, and that maybe speaks to Sana and Aki, is this idea of attunement. Which again, in quite a simple way, might just mean reconciliation with the world in which you live, becoming, you know, having a holistic sense of your understanding in your context. It doesn't need to be anything particularly kind of extravagant or odd. It's the idea of living in a system or living in a way which is healthy to you, whatever that system might be. And I wonder, Aki, whether you might like to speak to this sense of attunement, or Sana?
Attunement, it's a bit different from attunement, maybe. People say, actually, we are saying, you know, we are all hallucinated. And also healing. One thing we can do is understand what's going there. That's also, you know, helps us to heal as well. So this work, actually, Namjoon's work I made, also, I'm really kind of provoking and questioning, because, you know, usually Namjoon Park is not related to radio. And actually, you know, what I did is, during my research, I didn't really go into pre-existing discourses. What I did is actually to really talk to people who spend decades with Namjoon, like Amy Taubin, or Yuji Agematsu. What I said was, you know, what they said, actually, Amy Taubin was saying something really interesting. People didn't understand what Pike was saying at all. He was, you know, kind of, you know, people thought he translate, yes, but he was talking in his own language. But Amy clearly understood that, because she didn't take it as a words. She took as almost like a telepathy. Like, you know, Namjoon was, you know, Yuji Agematsu was saying, you know, Pike was looking at the TV like this for a long time, every day. You know, he's feeling that kind of, you know, electromagnetic waves. And, you know, that's his way of understanding the world. So, but, you know, critical discourses in art world, which is about Namjoon Paik, it's actually really all controlled in a sense. Like here, said, no? You said, no? Someone has a power and control information. Yes. But, you know, that's actually not just political something. It's also in the art world too. So it's, you know, keep kind of questioning, keep opening up. So that actually also leads to healing, in a sense, to me.
That's really interesting. I think this idea of controlling information is very, and maybe being able to take control of information. And maybe, Hyungmin, maybe you could speak to that a little bit, because I think, you know, your work is so much about, particularly Black Book, is about taking a form of control, a form of expressing power, a language, a system, and actually undermining it or interfering with it or taking back a degree of control over it. And maybe that kind of interference is also quite important.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, there's just so much information, and I do love researching as a part of my work. Like, for instance, like if I decide to work with a black humor, in particular like socio-political black humor, and I go dig in it, and then, you know, there are just so many of that, and then there's a historical part, and then there's a, you know, like geologically different parts and all that, and it could be overwhelming. But through going through that, I think I can sort of like I make sense of what happened. You know, it takes time for things to sink in, especially for me. I think artists are not reporters, and you know, there's no way that we tell you something fast. Like I really work in the opposite, and I work very slowly, and like as much as I can going through the sources and informations. I think I did try to make sense of what happened with, you know, there's a lot of horrible past written in the black humor that I picked. And those are actually black humors that are around. I sourced from historical books or random books or Reddit, a lot of Reddit reading. But then I also tweaked a little bit. I didn't really change it, but I tweaked a lot of things because based on the news that I read, I tried to also find the background, why that joke was made in that way, but then the similar things in history was actually worse than the joke. And then, for instance, like there was like, you know, like how many people are dead, like died in a factory fire in Bangladesh, and then the joke was actually how many souls are gone in the shoe factory. That actually something like that happened. So I added Bangladesh, and it was like 100 souls, souls of the shoe, and then actual souls left, but it was like thousands of people that actually had to be gone. So those things, I don't know, like that was sort of a healing process in a way, and then learning that nothing much changed, but then there are things we can do, like hopefully we read this again, and all that mixing things, I guess.
I think that sounds like a hopeful point on which to end, unless there are any other questions from the audience.
제가 한국어로 해서 저는 한국어로 해서 좀 떨리는데, 이제 아까 라디오를 얘기하셨잖아요. 사실 주파수는 존재론적 측면에서 항상 있어 왔는데 기술이 이를 탈신비화해서 우리가 그거를 주파수에 대한 어떤 정보를 우리가 인식할 수 있게 된 거잖아요. 그래서 이제 영적인 체험 자체가 이제 기술에 의해서 해체될 수 있는지, 그리고 이제 한국 샤머니즘 연구에서도 우리가 이제 강림을 할 때 뇌파를 조사해가지고 그게 뇌파가 실제로 변화가 있는지 이런 거를 기술적으로 연구한 사례들이 있어요. 근데 그런 것들이 이제 결과적으로는 어떤 차이가 없다 이런 식으로 나왔거든요. 근데 사실은 이제 기술이 더 발전되면 다른 방법이 있을지도 모르죠. 아무튼 그래서 제가 묻고 싶은 거는 이런 이제 영적인 체험이 기술에 의해 해체될 수 있는지, 그리고 이제 예술이 이를 기술의 어떤 도움을 받아서 그런 개인적이고 이제 일시적인 순간적인 경험을 그걸 고정해서 약간 이런 소유에 대한 집착으로 느껴질 수 있을 것 같은 그런 것을 재생산하는 게 맞는지 약간 궁금해요.
So, sorry, just if I understood that question correctly, it was about the potential advancements in technology that would make it possible to read our thoughts, put simply. I'm sure that technology exists already and is being put to nefarious uses somewhere in the world. I guess on that point I would probably return to what Haroon and Hiwa were saying, which is that advancements in technology will continue to expand the range of our individual perception, and that can either be a force for greater communion with other people and non-human animals, as we say, and the world, or it can be a force for division between them. And I think, as Hiwa was saying, or Haroon was saying as well, that's a question about people rather than technology. Whether we're optimistic about our species and its capacity to do good. Maybe is that too naive?
I mean, there's a thing about like you say. I think that probably the technologies are very close. You know, there's fMRI things and then EEGs and all kinds of technology that read brainwaves and neural oscillations. But there's you know, I'm sure at some point, and then there's Neuralink that Elon Musk is developing, and at some point, you know, I'm sure it's plausible that they can read brain neural oscillations to the degree where you can use it as a method of communication, as a form of telepathy, perhaps, right? Very plausible. But it's always going to be this communication. You know, lots of these technologies are like ways for us to communicate with one another. And it doesn't really resolve, like the biggest question is what consciousness is. And it doesn't resolve that question and how one conscious being communicates with another conscious being, whether that's human or non-human. I don't know if there's a thing there. It doesn't matter how much technology improves and allows us to communicate even telepathically, but what does it? It's what we do with that communication and how we reconcile each other is the kind of thing. Add anything to that?
I think that's a good place to end. We're right at the end of we've gone on unexpectedly long. So I just want to thank everyone on the panel: Sana, Almajeidi, Hyungmin Yoon, Aki Onda, Hiwa K, Harun Mirza. Thank you everyone so much.